Hey guys, welcome back to another week of digital learning and remote learning and social distancing and pandemic and quarantine and all these words that we didn't use a month ago and now we're using on the daily. So this week is all about thinking. And if we have time, I'm going to see if I can plan it out to where we can also talk about language at the end of this week. But last week was all about memory and how our cognition works with memory. This week is more about thinking and how we think and how we process information and sort information and things like that. So, when we think about something or anything, we typically have a concept of that particular thing. So this kind of goes along with, remember Piaget when we talked about development and we talked about like all of his stages of cognitive development. But before that, we talked about assimilation and accommodation and schemas. Basically, concepts and schemas are the same word. Schema is just a word. Piaget, like that's Piaget's word, but concepts basically the same thing. And it's when we group similar mental ideas of events, people, objects into in groups, just to make it easier to think about a lot of things. We tend to put things in groups. So if I was to ask you guys, think of a chair. All of these could possibly pop up into your head. What's funny is how our mind works, though, is we typically, when I ask you to say, think of a chair, you're not going to think of a combination of all chairs that you've ever seen that fit in the concept of chair. You typically think of maybe this chair, or maybe a chair that you have in your house, or maybe like a desk chair, something like that. And typically, whatever you're thinking of, that's your ideal version. That is a prototype. A prototype is the ideal version of an object. And so our concept of chair might include the following, and lots of things fall in a chair. But usually when thinking about chairs or whatever concept, you typically have your go-to. So, think of how many things fall under the category of flower, like daisies and sunflowers and tulips and roses and so many different things. But we might all have different prototypes of what the most ideal version of a flower is. And that's what the definition of prototype is, the ideal version of a concept. And so if I say, honey, I would love to have some flowers for Valentine's Day. And in my head, a prototype of a flower is a rose. But my husband's prototype of a flower might be a tulip because, he comes from Holland, Michigan, and they've got tulip time and they're all about tulips. And so, just imagine when we think differently, there might be confusion in miscommunication and confusion in relationships because we might all have different prototypes, yet we're all talking about the same concept. We're on the same page in the book, but we're kind of looking at different words. And so that's our first beginning of thinking, is putting things into categories, into concepts, and then finding that best one that fits. And it's going to be different for everybody. So let's say, here's the definition. They're all based on our prototype or ideal chair or ideal, whatever it is, flower. So how do we solve problems in our thinking? Because when we have different prototypes, that could cause problems in our thinking. So, I think rose, I get tulip. And so that might, there's a problem here. There's some miscommunication. So how do we solve problems? There's 3 ways of how to solve problems in our thinking. First one, trial and error. So can you think of any game, like a kid game, that is a trial and error game? Battleship, Go Fish. There's lots of different trial and error games. You remember that matching game where you flip over, you're like, oh, it's a cat and it's a dog. And you're like, I got to find the other cat one or the other dog one to make a match. Those matching games, that's trial and error. It's not the best way to solve problems in real life, but it is ways of solving problems that we learn as we're growing up with trial and error. The other way that we can solve, there's 3. The second way that we can solve a problem is using an algorithm. An algorithm is a step-by-step procedure that guarantees the solution to a problem. you can't go wrong with an algorithm. Of course, algorithms take a long time sometimes. So a recipe is a really good example of an algorithm. Take this many cups of flour and this many eggs and this much baking soda. At the end, you're going to get a cake. It's not like you follow the recipe for a cake and you get spaghetti at the end. No, it guarantees the solution, the right solution. You follow this recipe, you're going to get a cake. Of course, algorithms, they have their flaws. So let's say that you travel back in time before the idea of a smartphone, and you meet a good-looking significant other in, I don't know, a party or something. And back in the day, if you wanted to talk to someone, you didn't add them on Snapchat or hey, let me put your phone number in my phone real quick. You just had to write the phone number down. And then later when you got to your actual phone at home, because it was connected to the wall in your house, then you could call them. So let's say that you're at a party and you meet someone really attractive and you're like, wow, we really hit it off. And you write, or they write maybe, their phone number on your hand. And you're like, score, I'm totally going to call them later. Well, you being a responsible person, you wash your hands. Unfortunately, you washed the last 4 digits of their phone number off of your hand. So what's an algorithm? To get their phone number, because algorithms are step-by-step solutions that always get you the right answer. Some people might say, well, try to go to the party again and see if you know someone there that knows her phone number. That's not going to guarantee that that's actually going to be the case. You might not know anybody there. No one might not know her. An algorithm would be to call every single number, like 0001, 0002, 0003. Eventually, you're going to get that person that you want to talk to. It's going to take forever, and that's the problem with algorithms. They take a long time. But the good thing is, eventually you're going to get the right answer. Eventually, with given enough time, you will solve your problem. Of course, that's really, really time consuming. And so most people use heuristics to solve a problem. Hey, bud, go get dressed. Matthew just got out of the pool, so he's in his swimsuit.
Well, I need to go in the shower.
You're going to take a shower right now?
Well, I don't want to.
Well, did Daddy tell you to take a shower? Then you need to take a shower. Okay, got to get that pool water off. Heuristics is a way that most people solve problems. We typically, in our day-to-day situation, do not have time for algorithms, and trial and error is kind of a little silly. I mean, think of doing a worksheet in class with a trial and error. You write true, you turn it in, you get it back, and you get it wrong. What are you going to write false and try to turn it back in again? I don't think your teacher's going to be super pleased with that. So heuristic is a rule of thumb strategy. It is basically, it's using your best guess. Sometimes you're right. That's the good thing about algorithms is sometimes you're right. Of course, the bad thing is that you can totally be wrong with the best guess. It is quicker though than an algorithm. Okay, so here is a problem. You have these letters. If you got to unscramble it to make a word in English, of course, algorithm would be trying all 907,208 possible combinations. Of course, a heuristic would not try all those combinations. A heuristic would probably throw out any double Y combos because there's no English word with 2 Ys put together. You also probably can use the context clues of what class you're in right now, and it's psychology. So, and that's the word unscramble it, you get psychology. So speaking of heuristics, there are 2 types of heuristics. Let me lower myself down a little bit. The representative and the availability heuristic. And these 2 are constantly tested against each other on the AP psychology exam. So, representative versus availability heuristic. Keep in mind, this is making a judgment call. That's basically your best guess. It's using some context clues maybe, but it's trying to solve a problem, trying to make a best guess. And you're not always right, but you're using, a good rule of thumb, a good strategy. So what is the representative heuristic? So here's an example. Who do you think, based on this picture, went to Harvard? You're thinking smart person, educated, but if you know who this is Bill Gates. He did not graduate from college, he did not graduate from Harvard. And so she did. But your first judgment call is typically based on representatives. Representatives are typically, think of a poster child for whatever like concept. So I want you to think of every single dress up day that we've ever had. Nerd day, tourist day, dress like an athlete, dress like a college student, or like a preppy day, things like that. Y'all are all making judgment calls based on the way someone looks, based on what is the best representation of a tourist. Typically, we all are thinking of the same thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in a Hawaiian shirt is a tourist, but it's a pretty good guess. And so that's a representative heuristic, is you are using basically stereotypical answers to guess the answer to a problem. This is not your typical stereotypical person that graduated from Harvard. You would think this guy, he's in a suit, he's nerdy looking, white guy, glasses. Of course he went to Harvard. She probably isn't all that smart. Look how beautiful she is. Not the case. You're making a judgment call based on stereotypes, but in this case, you're wrong. That right there is Sonia Dara. She's a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. She went to Harvard. She actually graduated with an economics degree. But you are making judgments or heuristics based on her intelligence just by the way she looks. And sometimes you're right. Sometimes you can probably make a guess about someone's maybe intelligence or their job or whatever based on how they look, but you might be wrong. And that's the problem with the heuristic. Representative heuristics based on typically stereotypes. Availability heuristics, those are different. Availability heuristics is based on what's readily available in your mind. So I want you to think of maybe most recent things that are talked about or current events or something like that. So if I was to show you these two pictures, and you probably know that I'm kind of steering you one way, but if you were to guess, which place would you more likely should be scared to get mugged or murdered? And I showed you these two pictures of, one of them is the Bronx and the other one is Gary, Indiana. You might think, well, I've seen a lot of movies about street gangs that live in the Bronx and
I've been to Gary.
and if you know anything about, you're like, oh yeah, New York, they're always like, it's sketchy there. Well, the Bronx is definitely not as sketchy as Gary, Indiana. I don't know if it's recently changed, but it used to be, at least, the murder capital of the United States. Gary, Indiana is awful. But if there was to be a new movie with like a street gang that lives in Gary, Indiana, you probably roll your eyes and think like, how unrealistic and how silly. Gary, Indiana, oh, they're going to have like a gang war in the middle of the Indiana highway. But that's more realistic than the Bronx. But unfortunately, what's talked about a lot and what's shown on TV a lot is places like the Bronx and not places like Gary, Indiana. Same thing, like if I was to ask, I don't know, like things right now are in your head that have never been in your head before. But if I was to ask you, use the word, I don't know, social in a sentence, you're probably now more likely to say the term social distancing than social psychology. Maybe when we were in the unit of social psychology, maybe you would have said, if I said, hey, use social in a sentence, you'd say, hey, we're right now learning about social psychology. But if I was to ask you right now to make up a very similar sentence using the word social, because the word social distancing is more likely in your head than any other term with social, just because it's talked about a lot, it's available in your mind. It's readily available. So I am fortunate enough to teach upperclassmen, juniors and seniors. And at the end of every school year, well, maybe not every school year, but at the end of every school year, there's the top 10% breakfast, where the top 10% of the graduating class gets to invite the teacher to this breakfast, and it's really nice. I fortunately get to teach really great kids, and I get invited. And it's not because I'm their favorite. It's not because they just love psychology or economics. It's typically because I have them as a senior. And so when they're thinking of teachers, they're not going to be thinking as much. They're not going to be thinking as much of their junior high teachers or their elementary school teachers. You rarely see those, even though you can totally invite whoever you want. But it's usually the upperclassmen teachers, because that's what's readily available on these kids' minds is, who do I have? Well, who do I have right now? They sometimes, unfortunately, forget their underclassmen teachers and teachers in different schools. And that's just a decision making that they did, but they tend to forget. Okay. Problem with heuristics is it leads to overconfidence. Most of the time, people would be really confident in their answer that he's the guy that went to Harvard. People are probably really going to be confident in, yeah, the Bronx is probably sketchy. And when you guys are overconfident, you tend to make mistakes about your knowledge, about the accuracy of your judgments. You think you're more right when you might be wrong. But I can guess that, I don't know. There used to be a story where it's like basically making you test your heuristics. And it was something like, Alex is a truck driver. Alex likes to go to heavy metal concerts. And Alex smokes a pack of cigarettes a day. And then you're like, okay, you have a vision in your head about Alex. And it's like, oh, and Alex is a girl. And you're like, whoa. But in your head, you have the story of like, oh, it's probably a dude. In fact, I think 3 or 4 years ago, the AP FRQ for psychology, it talked about Sam and Alex buying a new apartment. And then what are things that they're going to go in their new apartment? And the AP, like College Board, they said it was kind of amazing about the pronouns that people used in their essay. They're talking about Alex and what is she going to do, and Sam, what is he going to do? Or was it backwards? Was Sam now Samantha and Alex is Alexander? Or were they gay? Was it he and her and her? It was just people's judgments based on stereotypes is what made them make that decision. And sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're right, but sometimes they're wrong. So we are typically overconfident about how quickly we can do assignments or write papers or finish something on time, or how smart we are, or how good of a driver we are. We're typically overconfident because most of the time when we're solving a problem, we're guessing. We're guessing based on stereotypes, and we're also guessing based on what we've heard recently. And you're more likely to get things wrong than right when you're just guessing and not using an algorithm or something like that. Anyway, that's all we have to talk about today. I'm going to ask you a question for your exit ticket on Google Classroom, but remember to mark things as done, like turn it in, press that button, and I will see you guys later today. Or later tomorrow. And also don't forget to look at those grading guidelines. Make sure you read that. Make sure you're clear about what is expected of you. And if you have any questions, you can send me a message through Remind or leave a message on Google Classroom so everyone can see it. But either way, I'll see you guys later. Bye.